Hello everyone, welcome back to All Things Money, yet another episode where we have a very special guest today, Dr. Akbar Zaidi, who's been an inspiration and one of the very few academics who continues to write on the Pakistan's economy and continues to have a very objective and data-driven opinion. Dr. Sahab, how are you today?
Very well, thank you, Ammar. Thank you for the invitation.
Always a pleasure talking to you. So, Dr. Sahab, what is your broader view on the budget that just recently came?
So the first word that comes to mind is disappointment. That this was a good opportunity, good moment, politically, geopolitically, in good vibe, to do things differently. Now maybe I was being over optimistic, or in the sense that I thought that they'd do something out of the box, but I was very, very disappointed in the fact that I don't think this is a growth budget. It's, in fact, anti-growth. I think it's anti-poor because given the way the distribution of taxes and income and things that they've done. So the reason why I'm disappointed is primarily because of the good time that this would have been to do something radical, different, creative, inspirational. They've let us down. So I think that's the big.
So you say that it could have been different.
Yeah.
What you said differently? What even is differently? What would different look like here?
So I think that because they've done things well for the last year and the last 2 years, where the exchange rate has stabilized, the inflation rate has come down. There's been some growth, 2.6%. I think it's going to be less than that when we look at the numbers in October. It'll probably be 2.5, 2.4. But chale, that's better. They should have sort of taken a slight gamble. So the problem is that they're tightly constrained by the IMF. In fact, every time you want to ask the finance minister what the budget is going to be, वो कहते हैं कि आप IMF से बात कर लें. You talk to the IMF. So I think in a way he's saying, look, I really don't know. I'm just filling in the boxes and ticking the boxes and filling in the numbers. So I would have thought that with our population still growing around 2%, unemployment, interestingly, poverty and unemployment figures are not given in the Pakistan Economic Survey anymore. They've stopped giving them. I think they're too embarrassing. Different estimates suggest that maybe 7%, 8% unemployment. Poverty line, so you said what should have been different? A few days before the budget came out, the World Bank poverty data came out, and one can question the data and stuff like that. But as a global comparison, Pakistan, 45% of Pakistan's population is below a comparable poverty line. The extreme poverty line has, the number of people have gone up in that as well. So even if we say, okay, we don't compare with Malaysia, fair enough. But at least over time, the numbers are getting worse. Pakistan's numbers are getting worse. So when that's staring you in the face, I see nothing in this budget which would address that problem. So when I say different, I said look at the numbers. As economists, so the other thing is that our finance minister is the one who's been there for a long time, was a chartered accountant. Now we have a banker. We've had bankers before. We've had global IMF people coming in. So for them, it's important to balance an accounting matrix. They're not concerned about the budget. They're not concerned about growth. They're not concerned about employment and things like that. And the finance minister is a very fine man, but he is not a political being. He's been put in place to do something. He's a technocrat. Okay, he's a senator now, but he's a technocrat. He's like Shaukat Tareen, who was also similar, came in, went out. Inke saath bhi yahi hoga. Same thing. So I don't think that they respond to, they're aware of what needs to be done. So when you say, okay, what should have been done, I would have said, take a chance. Things that have stabilized. This is before the Iran-Israel war. This is before, and which has now been settled in inverted commas. So I think they could have taken something bolder, something different. What do we do? For example, all the numbers, the important numbers have gone down. Agriculture, disaster. I mean, cotton down 30%, I think. Below expectations, the lowest it's been in some years. Main cash crops down, main crops down. Large-scale manufacturing not rising. So what do you do? The interest rate is not in their control. It's the state bank, independently it does it. So they keep saying, humne kam kar diya, we've reduced them. Not quite true. The state bank is an independent body, the monetary policy committee is independent, and it was expected that it will come down. I'm not sure if it's going to fall further, right? Especially given the global environment. What then? What has been done? This budget has only concentrated on how do we get taxes? How do we get them from this side, from that side, from that side? And that's about all. I think they've given some marginal, I don't know how much your salary is going to increase, but my suspicion is not a lot, right? And those who are on the high end, not a lot. Some in the 50,000 a month to 100,000 a month, a little bit. But beyond that, not very much. So how do you address issues of growth, employment, and the future? This budget has not looked at that.
I think one thing that you said that's really on point is the budget for the last many years, or for as long as I've been following, is about balancing the books more than anything else. You know, you get some taxes from here, reduce expenditures, or well, not reduce expenditures from anywhere, just maybe increasing them at a slower pace there. Just so on and so forth. It's more about balancing the books than anything else. You talk about poverty. I just feel we don't have any numbers that are reliable anymore for anything, and that includes large-scale manufacturing as well. The way we measure numbers, the way all of this is done, it's just very difficult to put a handle on things. So I was just looking at numbers for food as a percentage of household expenditure. Now, a proxy that normally used for that is the HIES survey that was last done in 2018-19. So adjusting for food price increases, adjusting for some wage growth, so on and so forth, what I saw was that for the first two quintiles, first quintile and the second quintile, food expenditure makes about 60% of the total expenditure. The same was around maybe 40%. So for economies where within the Pakistan's range, roughly the average is around 35 to 40%. That's a good benchmark to work with. We are essentially at 2010, 2011 levels of poverty for the first and the second quintile. And that is something that you will not really get from the budget. You will not really get from any official publication. You just really have to work these numbers. So maybe no one's even thinking about it or so what needs to be done there.
I think you make an important point about the quality of data. So two things have happened. I started looking at the data and looking at the economy in 1983. Like almost a different century now, you know. The quality of data now is fabulous, right? We're actually getting quarterly GDP figures. We're getting quarterly large-scale manufacturing figures. There's a very good database provided by the World Bank at a district level. Social indicators, economic indicators, very useful. Given all that, there's no excuse for them not to have quality data.
Yeah.
So the point that you're making is that, okay, 20 years ago, we say, yeah, data nahi hai. We don't.
It can be better, that's what I'm saying.
So, in fact, what is interesting is, and this was in the press conference that the finance minister gave when the economic survey came out, some very good reporters, and there are a few, said, okay, look, for the first 3 quarters, our growth rate is about 1.7%, and now you're going to say it's going to be 2.6%. Forget about anything else. The arithmetic doesn't add up. He didn't have an answer. He said, okay, I will look at it. Somebody asked him about poverty data. This is not published. No. So the two things that you've said. One is that most of the data is pre-COVID. Right? COVID, consequences of COVID still continues. So if it's 2018, 2019, so 20 to 23, when overall inflation went up 28%, and food was a major thing, a component of that, there's the problem. So the wheat crop this year has been good, you know, despite things, and I think we'll meet targets. But beyond that, we're importing basic dal and lentils and other stuff from Australia, from other countries. So there is a problem there. And fortunately, the exchange rate has been stable. So for a year, now again, that's changed. Over the last 4 months, it's actually deteriorated about 5%, about 5% or so, 4 to 5%, which means that the import cost is going to rise. So all this in front of them, I think there is the Pakistan Bureau of Statistics, right? There is, they've had the population census a few years ago. So they have data, they have housing data. I think there's no excuse to say that data is not available. I think it should be available, it should be in the public sphere. Economists should be looking at it. The government should come up with, you know, ways of looking and explaining it. That's something that there's a big cop-out here.
I think that is the whole point when we say that a budget is more of an accounting exercise. from my little experience with Islamabad, no one really looks at this data. It may exist. Population census is great. I'll just give you one anecdotal evidence there. We talk about solarization. There's a lot of solar that's happening. There's a lot of behind the meter solar that's not part of the grid. Yeah. There are about 3 million households in the country which have some sort of solar panels, and that data in the census. No one has looked at that data at all, or that has not driven policy.
And what's interesting, you posted something, a figure, which I looked at, where you showed that, and it's not surprising. I mean, it's like basic 101 common sense, that solar has been adapted and adopted in very poor regions. In Balochistan, I mean, that map that you showed, you show a high relationship of poverty, the chart, high relationship of poverty and solar thing. It makes sense because mainline electricity is not available, transmission not available. Second, cost is very high. Third is you hardly get electricity even if you're sitting under the electricity pole. Bijli nahi aati, it goes off. I mean, even in Karachi today, like 5 hours, 6 hours in lots of areas, very common. Okay, it's gone down over the last 20 years, but everybody is adapted to solar. I mean, even, and it's not, there are two levels. One is high end, high income, high wealth, DHA, defense, Gulberg, places like that, where people have been able to invest 20 lakhs or whatever it is, and then they see the bill coming down. But there are also those who actually carry it on their back. Their phone is now charged. I mean, a phone is more important than electricity, but you need electricity to have your phone, and for it to be charged. And you got just slightly outside of Karachi. You go to Balochistan, you go to Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, you go to areas which are not part of the main line setup, and everybody's using solar energy and it's available. But there's no, and they put 18% GST on that, which has now been reduced to 10. But 18, who came up with that? So there's this way, for a budget for them is, let's tax what's making money. Let's tax what is growing. IT is growing, let's tax that. Freelancers are growing, let's tax them. People think, let's tax them thinking about what the budget is going to be about. Let's tax solar energy. I mean, on the one hand, the finance minister says there's a climate catastrophe. We saw what happened in Swat on the river, and tourists being swept away. Now it's live television everywhere, on social media everywhere, and there's a climate crisis. Here, individuals, not even the government, individuals are making the effort to get electricity, get power on their own terms, and however they manage, jugaad karke they manage it. Ab wo keh rahe tax laga do. So what numbers are they looking at?
So that is the thing. Again, I'm going to solely blame the IMF for this. I think I'm on the hit list at this point. Everything is just like, I would say, it's just more of a prescription than anything else. Where does the 18% number come from? You can only have one GST number in the country, and that's 18%. Now, you can put a GST on a stocking right now, and that will be 18%. That cannot be 2% or 3%. So, is that distortionary? Does that constrain growth? Definitely, it does. I'll give you an example here. It's one of the favorite examples right now. You've got agriculture produce. Let's say you produce apples. Yeah, you've got an orchard, you have apples, you sell them in the market, or you sell your whole acreage to someone, and you receive cash in return. Important point being, you receive cash in return. The moment you're like, okay, you know what, I am going to make apple jam out of it. You're adding value to the economy. Suddenly, you're going to be a GST of 18% would be applied. So the taxation regime, as being prescribed by the IMF, is such that you're not allowed to add value. Actually, value addition is discouraged. So you continue to stay stuck in as many primary goods as possible, and whatever value addition needs to be done is essentially imported, because it's just cheaper to import right now, because suddenly you have this arbitrary ceiling or cost differential of 18%. This is exactly what's happening in cotton right now.
Not only that, if they're going to start reducing import duties, right, which is something that they're thinking about, which they've announced, but not sure about the timeline, it's going to be even cheaper. At the moment, there is a slight negative tax, let's call it an import duty, on certain items. But once the slabs fall further, the numbers fall further, the amount falls further, and you have an 18% tax, you're discouraging investment in Pakistan. Absolutely. You're blaming the IMF, something that we do with a lot of passion, and there's a lot of truth in that. And one can also say that maybe you're not looking at our own government, and it's easy for our government to say, IMF ne ki hum to kuch nahi kar sakte. You know, that's also a cop out. So that's also something that by passing the buck on the IMF for everything that's gone wrong in our economy is partly right, but not completely right. I mean, I'll tell you a small example which affects people like you who go and teach, for example. There used to be a 75% rebate on income in 2006 on people who taught. We can't export anything at the moment, right? Trump's tariffs are one part of it. Our large-scale manufacturing is down. Cotton, as you just said, has collapsed. Which areas do we look at? Knowledge. Okay, it's cheaper. You have a university. There are 267 universities or institutions called universities. Not all of them are, but they call themselves universities. You're looking at you're looking at the creation of knowledge, especially IT, computer science, business analytics, things like that. And you want to encourage competent people to move towards teaching, research and teaching. So 2006, 75% of those who are teaching at universities at higher institutions got a rebate. That went down over time to 25%. Now the headline 5 days ago in the newspapers was that IMF says the 25% rebate on teaching has to be taken away. Now, I think if you do the numbers, right, the number of people who would benefit by that, it's also a symbolic signal. Number of people who would benefit by that, and the amount that would be is not very large, given our trillions of rupees spent on useless projects, right? Had the finance minister stood up and said, or told the IMF, look, yeah, okay, call it a subsidy. You don't like subsidies, nor do I, and so on and so forth. But in order to encourage certain things, and this is the cost, I don't think that argument was made. So while you say it's the IMF saying 18%, okay. But at some places you have to say, you know, the damage being done by water, the lack of it and excess of it is both. Climate change, solar, we have to have some sort of mechanism there. So you can't take the IMF as the blanket, you know, bhai sahab, you know, Mahaguru, कि भाई हमने कह दिया आपको करना पड़ेगा. I think, yes, you have to take dictation, but you take it in certain places. Okay, look, this is what we are doing, this is where we are giving subsidy, but these are areas where we're not going to compromise. They're not going to back off with the $7 billion loan. You know, so you have to do the math. So I think it's easier, there's more complacency. Oh, the IMF does it, we can't do anything about it. And I think that's happened with solar, that's happened with higher education, that's happened with knowledge. I mean, we are, you know, cutting off our own nose, we are breaking our own feet just to make the IMF happy.
So it's not even, I agree with you, it's not even about the IMF. I mean, what I figured is if you say something reasonable, if you have a reasonable plan, there is no reason why someone won't allow it, and I've seen that happen multiple times. So there is an absence of any reasonable plan. For example, one would say, okay, you know what, you want to give some tax concessions or reduce the tax rate overall, then maybe you need to increase revenue from somewhere else, but then there is no other option there. I was looking at the tax brackets and comparing that to other parts, other jurisdictions. Interestingly, our highest tax bracket, 13% of all taxpayers are in the highest tax bracket. The same percentage on a relative basis for pretty much 10 other jurisdictions I looked at, which includes developing countries, developed economies. That's a 1 to 1.5%, because the top tax bracket means you're the super rich and thereby you need to tax them. But 13% are tax share, and the lowest tax bracket has maybe around 30%, while in other economies that number is around 75 to 80%. So our tax bracket or the code is, I would say, just not even optimally configured at this point. There are ways to, again, as an academic, to solve this problem academically and have some kind of revenue neutral output where you can create better structures and maybe get more taxes. And that also falls into creative policy making. For example, what's happening right now is because of such a lopsided, distorted tax structure, which, by the way, goes against every single academic publication of the IMF on tax slabs. It's completely against what they actually preach while they write. Because of this lopsided structure, a lot of salary payments are now in cash. You're actually pumping up the cash economy, and that is the unintended consequence. So my point here is that we just look at the PKR figure that you can generate, but completely ignore the unintended consequences
So
of this.
we have a pyramid like this, and then we have an inverted pyramid on that. This is the number of people who pay tax. This 1% very, very small. I think that the number of income tax payers is still
About 2 million.
yeah, so that's less than 1%, 0.8%, right? So this is this pyramid. But you invert the pyramid, okay, this is the big base and this like this. This is where the as you said, the money coming from. Then 1% paying whatever, 30%, 20% of the entire tax. So the first thing that I said was, this is a fabulous, so my frustration and disappointment is that it's the moment that matters, the context that matters. The government is not struggling. It's not going to fall. The military and the civilian governments are one. They're not even on the same page. There was a time when they were on the same page.
They're
look
one.
what happened. Now they're one. You can't distinguish. I mean, they're both saying the same thing. The field marshal has met President Trump. That doesn't happen very often. In fact, it's never happened. And we've only had one field marshal before that, and so who was the president. But so you have a structure like that. You have a moment like that, and then you should go after retailers. You should go after real estate. You should go after those who don't pay taxes. This is the best moment that I can think of in many years, maybe decades, where the economic, political, geopolitical, government, security...
All stars are aligned.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a better waqt nahi aane wala. It's going to go downhill from now.
Yeah.
So whatever happened in the region and onward, people fall off pages. So things are going to go change. In fact, but yesterday the Supreme Court has given them a further boost. With the PTI seats not there and so on and so forth. So that's the frustration. That's the disappointment. Exactly what you're saying. Why not take a bold step when you can? Whenever you're saying, okay, we're waiting for you to do something. They do nothing. Go after those who don't pay taxes. Tax that sector which avoids taxes. See, one thing that we spoke about earlier about data. There's also been a lot of digitalization, right? Which means you can follow the money. You know where the money is coming from. I have a colleague who's going for Umrah in a couple of days with 7 people. I said, how much is it going to cost you? He said, 5 lakh per person. They're going for about 10 days, 2 weeks. That's, 40 lakhs. So somebody who's paying that much, and there are others, each trip is about 2, 3, 4 lakhs, and the numbers, especially at this time of the year and before Ramzan and during Ramzan, the number, how many of them pay taxes?
Interesting that you mentioned religious tourism here. And for Umrah, I've been looking at the numbers, and most money that essentially goes out is through informal channels. And you know exactly how many people are going for Umrah. You would have an estimate how much they're going to spend, but that does not reflect in your accounts. So a lot of that is essentially grey economy, and it is, you can find out exactly who went out, who is sending the money out in like 10 minutes. The data is all out there, but not much is being done about it, or not much wants to. No one really wants to do anything about it. Same goes for Hajj, same goes for Umrah, same goes for pretty much every transaction out there.
So I think that on the one hand, they talk about digitalization, the RAS and other things. They've made inroads, mobile money, but what are they going to do with it? They keep saying, they have so much data, Nadra has so much data, CNIC related, things like that. So there is so much data available, and something that we spoke about earlier about Pakistan Business Statistics, Pakistan Bureau of Statistics, the quality of data, but if you're not going to look at it, if you're not going to do it, what's the point? So that's part of the story. The other is, things like they talk about taxing activity. Agriculture ko tax karna ya nahi karna. Retail ko, that's unimportant. Nobody says, are you an economist? Are you a journalist? Are you a film star? What's your income, right? Taxes on income should be taxes on income. It should not be on activity. So that, this, we've been saying this for a long time, 20 years, 30 years. Don't say agricultural income tax is exempt. Say, we want to support agriculture. Very, very different. But you pay your taxes based on income, whether it comes from agriculture, whether it comes from
any other source.
Yeah. So this, and it's become a joke now that we have a formal category called non-filer. People actually ask you, do you file your taxes or do you not file? Oh, I don't file my taxes. I'm a non-filer. लोग बड़े दबंग तरीके से कहते हैं मैं तो tax नहीं करता. तो ठीक है 2% और दे देंगे or whatever it is. But do away with that and just say that there is no such category. And they had raised some issues when the speech was made by the finance minister, but when the budget was passed recently, they've taken them back. They said up to 50 million you can buy a house and do this and buy cars and stuff like that, and there won't be any additional taxes for non-filers. For filers, they can do whatever they want. So they talk the talk, but they don't talk the talk,
So I think in that these are also lazy, arbitrary measures. I mean, you cannot buy a car. Sure, you'll buy a car on someone else's CNIC. Right. Like when you import cars here, you can import it for personal use as a gift. Now every single car that's brought in is essentially by some poor laborer who is working in the Middle East. Doesn't even know he has a car in his name or his name was used. So these are just bad policies, the bad policy designs which are done in an arbitrary manner, and that's why they just consistently fail and just lead to more distortion. So on taxes, I had Miftah a few weeks back. He actually converted me on how the fiscal side needs to be fixed. And one of the issues that he identifies is NFC. Yeah. Now, he makes a good point that the transfers are done right at the top line. So whatever is collected, about 57% of that gets transferred to the provinces. Whatever is left, that's about like 43% or whatever, that needs to run the government, that needs to pay off the debts, that needs to figure out the deficit. So mathematically, it's essentially impossible to ensure that you can have, you can reduce your deficit or turn a surplus, because from your top line, you're taking out 57%. I mean, and the example I typically come up with is that of a holding company which has subsidiaries. So if a holding company just gives off all of its revenue to the subsidiaries, it can never survive like this because the deficit will only continue to increase. How do we fix this problem?
There's no question about it. I actually disagree with a lot of what Miftah says about the NFC and the 18th Amendment. He's not very, he's written a lot about it, and there's for once there was a very lively debate about economic issues. Usually there isn't, and lots of people, I don't know if you wrote as well, I didn't, other people wrote, but the point is not incorrect. I think it's not that the Federation is not collecting enough taxes. I think it's collecting too many from the wrong source. That's the first thing.
So slightly, I'll just interrupt here. It is collecting too many, and that is because it has to give away 57% of whatever it collects to the provinces. So why don't we start from the bottom up and fix the deficit first, and then see what the top line looks like?
I think the provinces are, bathed in huge amounts of money. They don't have to do anything. So to say that we have a tax-free budget is a joke. All provinces have a tax-free budget. The problem is that the provinces don't really tax very much. So the problem comes from there. I mean, urban income tax, for example. I mean, we've seen figures which everybody quotes in Chennai, for example, or in Mumbai, the amount of money that is collected, I forget the number, is more than perhaps the income tax collected in Pakistan. I'm exaggerating, but
they're similar numbers. Similar numbers.
I mean, it's astonishing because the local base. So when you have a very strong government in the Punjab, you have a very strong government in Sindh, I don't know what's happening in Balochistan, you have a strong government in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa as well, 3 different parties. I mean, they should be put to task to collect taxes from their own people so that the Federation has some money. But it's not as simple as the way you put it. I'll tell you why. For example, tax is collected, debt is created in my name and your name, right? And then the government has to pay it. We don't know what's happening. Where's that money going, right? The public sector development program this year is less than 1%.
So this is going to the provinces, no?
No, it's going to, but there is a collection taking place, right? So it's going for debt. The debt repayment is taking place. Why is debt repayment taking place? Is it only because of the provinces? I don't think so. Is it because of high level of misuse of funds at the federal level? Probably. Is it overextended projects which need not be done at the federal level? Why is there an education ministry why is there a health ministry at the federal level when these have been given? Okay, there should be some coordination, let's call it that. But beyond that, they have no jurisdiction. Why are there multiple levels of ministries at the federal level and at the provincial level after the 18th Amendment? People used to make the argument, this is 2010, so 16 years from now, ago. People used to make the argument that provinces ke paas, they don't have the ability. Probably not at that time, a little more now, and give them the responsibility, they'll do that. So I agree that there's a problem with the structure of the model, right? 53-47. There's a problem there. I think that, I wonder what would happen if it became reverse. If, for example, the federation had 57 and 43 was left to give it to the, I think there'd be more pressure on the provinces to get their act in order. I think that's required. But what happens to the 57? I'm also concerned with that. I'm also concerned with, will the federal government take more debt? Will it actually pay it off? Will it start employing more people in ghost enterprises like provincial government? So there's a need to look at both federal and provincial. It's not simple that provinces need more taxes. They do. The federal government needs less taxes. Very true. But I think there needs more to have more communication on that.
There needs to be more coherence. There is no denying that. So one thing that I always think about is you can have a contractionary fiscal policy at the federal level, but the moment you go to the province, it's just expansionary because, as you say, it's a tax-free budget. So by default, it's just an expansionary fiscal policy, and you've got ghost institutions across all provinces, and you just don't even know what's happening here. So the provinces need to step up, and some spending needs to be reined in, need to be more responsible. There needs to be more efficiency in the process. How do you think that can be done?
I think there has to be an extensive conversation between political actors, bureaucrats, technocrats at the province and the federal level. First of all, we haven't had an NFC for, I think we're only on the 7th one, which is, I don't remember when it was, even I've forgotten, it was that long ago. So by constitutionally, it's supposed to be 5 years. So let's start with that. Asha, one of the things, as far as I remember, that is that each time the NFC award is announced, it's not supposed to be less than the last year. I think they made that constitutional amendment in maybe 2010, I forget when, but I think they need to revisit.
So that's inflationary on its own.
It's more than inflation. It's inflationary even as a share. So even they're saying that even the share can't be the same. So if Punjab got X percent, I think 48 or 47%, they gave up some of their share based on population because they brought in poverty and other things. Balochistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa got some royalty, 1%, 2% because of gas and water and things like that. So things can be done. They can be renegotiated. I think 2010, the 18th Amendment, lots of things happened in the first Zardari presidency where there was room for negotiation and discussion. I think there's need to go back to that table now, which is not going to happen because you've got a very famous prisoner in jail. His political party rules one country. It's not going to happen. You need to address some of these. Say, a lot of political problems have been put under the table, under the carpet, and have been addressed. Put them aside. That's also one way of addressing them. Let's do what we can. But I think it's important to recognize them and start talking. And you need that conversation to start. I think provinces, the federal government, and technocrats and bureaucrats and other power brokers need to say, okay, this model is not working. Why? See, one of the other surprising things is that there's no tax revolt. Right? The business community कहते यार दे देंगे हम सौदा कर लेंगे. They should be revolting. They should know we're closing down. It's only the shop owners who close down. When you have a retail tax, 4 दिन के लिए धरना कर दिया, बंद कर दिया. Those who are being overtaxed need to say that we are not going to pay this. We are not getting the services, especially from the federal government. We are not getting the services. Water, sanitation, security, schools, health, all privatized. Those who pay taxes don't go to public schools. Right.
But that's the thing. Then the federal says this is provincial responsibility, and we give the fair share to the province, and it's the failure of the province to ensure delivery of all of the things that we just listed.
So that's the conversation that needs to take place. How is this model going to continue? So the federal government is collecting the taxes and handing them over to the provincial government and saying, look, schools are bad because they don't want schools to work. Don't look at us. Then people should say, okay, then federal government should not collect taxes. Let the provinces so that they can be held accountable. So I think it is a political economy problem. It's an institutions problem. But it's not being addressed because काम चल रहा है और काम चलता रहेगा. Let things go. ठीक है, चल गया. There's been no protest. There's been no 2 or 3 articles in the newspaper. Yours, a few others. The KCCI and Karachi Chamber of Commerce, the Punjab Chamber, the federal, they've said, we don't like this, take away the powers of the taxman. Okay, they've given some room there, but that's it. There's been no fundamental change in what was presented in a very negative budget.
So, yeah. So coming to the provinces, I mean, whenever we focus on the budget, we just focus on the federal budget. No one even knows when the provincial budget comes, and there's just so much fat there. It's hilarious. I was just looking at the annual development plans for Sindh and Punjab. The top line, the most expenditure was essentially on roads. And that made up about 30%, 30 to 35% of every budget every year. Punjab, in fact, made more than 7,000 kilometers of roads across different areas or different districts. So my point is, and when I look at the PSDP, there are about 3.5 trillion rupees worth of projects. A lot of those projects essentially getting something like 20 million every year, 50 million every year, to essentially just so that the project remains active. There's a project development office, whatever, so on and so on. And that's inefficiency. That happens on the provincial level as well, that happens on the PSDP level as well. So again, you know, we both know the answer, but there is a way to prune that inefficiency, to really cut down on projects which you don't really
Why
need.
do that when you've got so much money? When you've got so much money, you've got money to waste. So it's, I think you said why not start from the bottom up, the taxation structure. Agreed. But when you have a model which is ill suited to that, where it's top down at the moment, okay, we've collected here, take that money, and then say, okay, we've got so much money, they can raise some local taxes, provincial taxes if they want, but they don't want it because they've got so much money coming in. So in fact, the irony is that provincial governments can raise huge amounts of money because they've got federal money coming into it through the NFC. They can raise their own finances and they can do away with poverty. They can do away with, I mean, malnutrition. I mean, you talk to Miftah and he'll tell you 33% or 40% of his famous thing is 40% of kids are stunted.
Stunted,
right? And then the numbers came out from the World Bank recently. There's polio is back in a big way. Last couple of years, that's because of sewerage. You fix that. These are provincial subjects. They should be fixed. Provinces can't say we don't have the money, right? Okay, there are certain, the National Highway Authority, for example, I mean, the Sindh government has been demanding this road from Karachi to Sakhar, you know, which is in, from all the way joining the motorway. That's required. Why don't they use their own money? You know, they'll say they'll have to tax. They'll provide a service to their people. So I think we've sort of ignored the central issues. We're talking around them. कहते हैं वो ये जो है ना budget में इन्होंने इतना बढ़ा दिया ये कम कर दिया. We're not even looking at the main thing. And the question that you're raising and some other people, some economists are raising is precisely this. It's not about an accounting matrix every year. It's about a fundamental distribution of financial and wealth resources, which we need to talk about between individuals. We don't talk about income inequality also. No? The numbers don't exist. I've done research, we've done research, you know, 20 years ago the numbers used to exist. Now we don't even know. We assume, like you said, HIES data gives you some indication. So, you know, we're not looking at those things. So we're just ignoring high priority issues and areas which need to be looked at by looking at, okay, do aur do char hote.
So again, let's just move towards education because you're in the sector. You said right now there are institutes, not universities. Last time around, I think before the elections, when it was the last parliamentary session, you had maybe 25 new universities come up because apparently any MNA can go and just say an act can be passed and a university can be created, which basically means suddenly another fixed cost for the HEC that will be funded by the federal budget till perpetuity. Why does this happen and how can this be fixed?
So on paper, there are 267 universities. They don't give education, they give degrees. I think we need to distinguish between what is education and what is a degree.
Just one more thing. Do we even need more universities?
Coming to that. Yeah. I actually think, and this is now the global trend. I mean, there's an educational crisis because they are financially not sustainable. So, two things here. One, the HEC budget has actually fallen in real terms. So they're building more universities, but the budget is going down. So I don't know what the quality of building, leave alone education. You start with land, you get the building, and then we try to fill in people with, I don't know what kind of degrees, but you know that's a separate issue. So out of 267, I'm sure half of them can be closed down. There should be amalgamation. There should be aggregation. They should say, okay, there's this region. So I like roads, right? I like roads being built. I think communication is and transport and communication is a very important way to get people to move from one place to another and to come back also if they wanted to. Accessibility is very important. So if 7,000 kilometers of roads have been built, that's fantastic. Sindh needs to do the same. Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, I think that has been happening. Balochistan especially, I think roads are important. They need to be built. So if you're building roads, then you don't need a university in every village. You don't need a university in every halka. You don't need a university in every town. You need a university where you can have what are called agglomeration economies, right? You get 5 or 10, 20 very good professors. Rather than 2 professors at 5 places, you get 10 professors at one good place. The university grows, there's interaction and things like that. So, I mean, university that you and I are familiar with, they concentrate on good quality faculty, and that's why people want to come there. So it's, on the one hand, we say there should be access, completely agreed. Not everybody can afford a private sector university. Not everybody can afford expensive public sector universities, and they are very expensive, we know that. So there has to be access, very important. But there has to be quality also. There has to be education also. So one of the things is that every year they'll add more universities. Every year the quality of education will fall. And there needs to be an audit by HEC or an independent body of professors, academics, who can say, okay, let's actually go and see what the quality of education in these 267 universities is. I mean, I'm sure 10 or 20 of them are outstanding. 30, 40 of them are very good. 20 are passable. The rest, 120, why do we have them? So there is, like in every area, just what we were talking about earlier, federation, province, there's a need for conversation. There has to be some sort of intellectual, financial, sustainable audit of why are we building more universities. It's a politically viable thing. Construction is where the money is. And
that's where the roads come from as well.
And I don't mean money only, right? That's where privilege is, that's where patronage is, that's where pork barrel stuff is, right? That's where money is made, whoever's doing it, whatever agency. A university means a lot of money, and it's supposed jobs. Jobs are people who should not be hired. So there's a need to, these are core areas where academics, policymakers, academics need to come up with research, figures, and arguments. Policy maker माने ना माने, हमारा तो काम है दुनिया को समझाना, ना समझे.
Makes sense. So, on education, let's just move towards primary, secondary, and secondary education. We've got about 30 million children who are out of school. I haven't looked at the budget numbers this year for province and federal, but last year, the province and federal combined together, for every student that was enrolled, we were spending maybe around 5,000 rupees a month, just ballpark estimate, maybe off by 10-15%. The Citizens Foundation, which is one of the excellent educational institutions, spends about maybe 3,500 rupees. Again, these numbers may be dated, but it was lower than what the federal and the provincial government.
So it's not about money.
It's not about money. So what I'm saying is it's about efficiency. When we compare what Pakistan spends on education to someone, say Bangladesh or Sri Lanka, we spend much higher than they do on a per student basis, but they have better education and literacy outcomes. So this is an inefficiency issue, and the inefficiency issue can be linked with, this is again not an infrastructure issue. The infrastructure exists, as you said, construction, buildings exist. They may be ghost schools, but the infrastructure does exist. 90% of the budget, education budget, essentially goes towards paying salaries of teachers. Yeah. So then this becomes a people/political issue.
It's an employment generation.
It's an employment generation. Yeah. So my point is, how do we, this is a political economy issue.
Absolutely.
Where every unit or department or whatever is overstaffed. So you go one day and say, okay, you know what, it's time to just prune and just make things more efficient.
Yeah.
But obviously there will be a lot of protests against you. They'll be like, okay, you know what, you're taking away jobs. Yeah. What will we do? So on and so forth. How do you fix this?
That comes to what we said earlier. Now, if there's going to be no generation of growth, right, in the economy, which is the federal government's task, to signal, to spend money, if unemployment and poverty is not going to be their concern, this is going to be the consequence. That, chalo, naukri deni hai, de do yaar school mein. You need one chowkidar, you've got 5. You need one naib qasid, you've got 3.
Why do you even need a naib qasid at this point?
You don't. I mean, people are more students, and the entire structure is wireless, right? And so, you're absolutely right. It's not about money. Universities are not about money. It's about quality. It's about finding the right combination of administrators, teachers, finance people, and models of governance, if you want to call it. I mean, I don't like that word, but models of running an institution. And at the provincial level, I mean, so now primary and secondary and tertiary education, at least, if not higher, is clearly the responsibility of the provincial government. I think Yusuf Nazar had an article yesterday or a couple of days ago in one of the newspapers where he's shown that in Sindh, the literacy rate, I think it's the literacy rate and the primary education rate have fallen. I mean, that a rate like that falling, when we talk about the knowledge economy and IT and stuff like that, I mean, that's a serious problem. So, and that's the provincial government, whether it's all four of them or five, Gilgit-Baltistan as well. So there are models. I mean, like the Aga Khan schools, for example, in the northern areas you're familiar with, or even in Karachi, they are phenomenal. And there's kids, they come to the IBA, for example, and they excel. You teach them, I teach them. I mean, these kids are extraordinary. So there are local models of education. There are people, Shehzad Roy runs his own schools. There are people who are intervening. And they're showing that without the very large, elite school money, you can make public sector work. It's how you manage it, how you train, how you intervene. There are small projects, but nothing more than that. Yesterday, I think it was in the evening, I was watching the Chief Minister of the Punjab. She spoke for 3 hours. It was a live telecast for obvious reasons. I happened to watch parts of it. And she started telling us about the schools. When I watched it, it was about the schools in the Punjab, and she started saying, this is what we've done, this is what we've done, this is the quality, this is the output. I'm waiting for the output results. Our students, you're putting in money, you're putting in quality, you're building bathrooms, toilets. You have water. One of the most important things is for girls, for example. I mean, forget boys. Whether they study or not is irrelevant. If girls study, that changes. That's Bangladesh, that's Sri Lanka, these are Malaysia. These models are about girls' education. You just provide girls' education, you've solved half of the problems of Pakistan. Give them access closer to their homes, give them water, give them toilets, and they want a boundary wall.
Nutrition.
And nutrition follows. I mean, you just give this to girls. The rest of the problems are simple. So these are things that academics have written about. There's very good research. It's where the policymakers say, "Hame to naukriyan deni hai." Okay.
So that is the thing. How do you nudge the province to actually do what it's supposed to do? This is not a resource problem. The models are there. This is an execution problem. How do you say, okay, you know what, there shouldn't be any out-of-school children in Sindh in the next 4 years? How do you solve this problem?
You try and tell the policymakers that they're building a crisis. If they're willing to understand, there's no other way. Look, your and my kids, they won't go to the schools which we are talking about. Most people who have money, I mean, even poor people, my driver जो घर में काम करती हैं वो हम तो प्राइवेट स्कूल में भेजते हैं वहाँ अंग्रेजी पढ़ाते हैं वहाँ तालीम हो जाती है so there people are voting with their feet, very good example.
So they're spending, right?
They're spending, but they're actually spending out of their very limited income, and so everybody realizes, every user realizes that education is important. लड़की हो या लड़का वो बदल गया है. Whether you are religious or you are not religious, or whatever that means, not religious. If you are, whatever your context is in regard to faith, everybody knows that education is the future for your children. And people are making sacrifices. They're doing 2 or 3 jobs. Poor people, 10,000 idhar, 20,000 idhar, 10,000, they're doing that. And they're all going to private schools, which are less regulated, but they think there's a perception that they're better. So if
at least they're operational, no?
Yeah, they're operational, and there is the parents can make a noise. हम 5,000 रुपए दे रहे हैं, teacher नहीं आ रही, उनको बंद करना पड़ेगा. So somebody is going to listen to them. That doesn't happen in the public sector. So 60%. I think this is about some 8 or 10 years ago. 66% of students in the Punjab go to private schools. And this is not Faisalabad, Lahore and Gujranwala and Pindi. This is in small towns as well, if there are any small towns left. People are actually going to private schools. You travel by road, you should do that, just travel by road. All you'll see is Angrezi medium school, English medium, and private schools all over. They are being, and you go to a public sector school, it's just, nobody's there. You go to private schools, there'll be teachers there, badly trained, there'll be lots of students there, parents come and they collect their kids. So we need to think about it. So the question is, where is the money on education for primary schools going to? Is it actually going towards students, or is it going towards employment? In all four plus Gilgit-Baltistan and Azad Kashmir, where is this money going to? Is it an employment opportunity and exchange, or is it towards education? That question.
I think
needs
it's just
to
a
be done.
fiscal stimulus that just goes to.
Yeah, so that comes to your question of, should the federal government say we are not going to give you any money? What will happen then?
And should that be linked to relevant outcomes?
Yeah, you raise money, we'll give you some money.
Or
raise tax.
you raise
Equality.
or you raise literacy levels. Or again, as it comes to your thing about more accountability, where you say, okay, you know what, you've got certain literacy levels, you'll get the next tranche when your literacy levels are, let's say, 10% more or 5% more.
Yeah, but then the provinces will say you're interfering in what we should do. I mean, there's this 18th Amendment.
So that's the thing. If the province says, okay, no one's going to study in this province anymore, should that be acceptable?
Not at all.
Because this is what's happening. When we started the conversation, about 60% of the first and second quintiles was essentially going towards food expenditure. Now, if that increased from 40 to 60%, something else reduced as well. And the first casualty in this case was education.
Always.
And this
Health.
is why out of school children has actually increased. Again, these are just broad numbers. There is no granular data there. But even the broad number is about 30 million children. That's more than population of many countries in the world.
Yeah.
So if the province is failing at education, whether by design or by accident or whatever, should the federal just say, okay, you know what, I'm not going to intervene because 10 million children are out of school there and maybe in 5 years there'll be 20 million children. Where do we draw the line where someone intervenes and says, okay, you know what, this cannot go on?
Yeah, I mean, well-meaning, what you're saying, I agree. I'm not sure how it can be done.
So I'm sure there are other jurisdictions in the world where something happened and eventually you reach some.
They're called revolutions, they're called overthrow of people's power or military power, whatever the consequence may be, authoritarianism. There's called, people revolting and saying, "Hum tax nahi denge." People going out in the streets. I don't see that happening in this country for these reasons. I see it happening for very different reasons. People protest for whatever reason they want, but nobody gone out on the street said कि तालीम का मेयार बेहतर करें. पानी नहीं आ रहा तो उस पर आ जाएंगे for a couple of days, फिर पानी आने जाएगा चुप, but they won't address the problem कि टैंकर से आ रहा है या गंदा पानी आ रहा है या क्या हो रहा
So
है.
उसमें one thing that I always say, it's expensive to be poor.
Very.
Because water, it's more expensive per gallon basis than you would for a richer household. Electricity, more expensive. Everything is more expensive for a poor household than a richer one, and that is where effectively the state has failed. And I would include every arm of the state, whether it's federal or the provincial, at that. Every single metric we look at. I mean, Karachi has a major water problem. It's not a resource problem, it's a distribution problem.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I think we'll just wrap it up. One thing, just going to go very radical here. South Korea had its growth years, and General Park was one of them. I'm in like a General Park phase right now. So what he did was for export-oriented growth, but very authoritarian model that you're just saying. Do you think something like that happening?
I hope not. I think democracy is very important. Democracy has failed, continues to fail. I don't think authoritarian unelected governments, there are authoritarian elected governments like we've got in Turkey and we've got in India, they're different. They are responsive to the needs of the people. So I don't believe in benevolent dictatorship of an unelected kind. I don't believe in dictatorship at all, benevolent or
Otherwise.
Whatever the opposite is. But I think that we've spoken about. I mean, I'm sometimes alarmed at the extent of how should I say it? Like people not getting involved. There's desperation, but there's no political action. There is a crisis for education, health, water, basic services, security, but nobody's getting to it and addressing it. I don't think that we should think of authoritarian models, whether it's of whatever kind, even of the China kind or other kind, I think, or the Singapore kind. I think it's important that each country has its own history, its own. We've seen what authoritarian has done to us. I don't want a repeat of that. People will say, what has democracy done? I would agree. It hasn't delivered. We need to address those problems as well. So it's the economy, rights of people, what they perceive, what they have, what they don't have. I mean, these are all political economy questions. And after 79 years almost, 77 years, 79 years, if we still haven't addressed them. And I think it's a sad reflection on our elite, political, military, technocratic, bureaucratic, and it's a problem that we talk about but haven't addressed.
Thank you, Akbar sir. It was a wonderful conversation. Basically, it was all over the place, but I think we're like way over time here. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Ammar. Always a great pleasure to have you around.
All right, everyone. Yet another. I think this was the longest episode in a while. Thank you for watching. Till next time. Bye.